see. I need to mute again.
Hello and welcome to our discussion brought to you by the Aspen Institute's Education and Society and Ascend programs. I'm Sasha Ann Simons, national correspondent and substitute host of 1A from WAMU and NPR in Washington, D.C. And I'm happy to serve as your moderator for this hour. Now, as a mother of two children, you can imagine that the term back to school is uttered a lot throughout my household, especially over the past week as my daughters prepare to, do their best job to get ready for another semester of middle school online. And like many families across the country, we were frustrated with parts of our education system before the pandemic, let alone now. Navigating that system has become even more difficult. But whatever the mode of discussion or instruction this school year, whether it's in person, whether it's online, or a hybrid approach, researchers with the Aspen Institute say that schools can't bear the burden alone. They need more support to help ensure that families and students and educators have what they need for their health and their well-being. Aspen's 3 recommendations are the need to foster cross-agency and community partner collaboration, the need to fully leverage federal funds and streamline eligibility and reimbursement, and the need to identify additional human capital to support students and teachers. So how can governors and mayors use their offices to address these growing needs? And how can they engage and empower families to create effective solutions? Joining me to discuss this is Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers. He's the 46th governor of Wisconsin and a Democrat. Prior to his election, he served as the Wisconsin State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Governor Evers, thanks for being here. Also with us is Tim Keller. He's the Democratic Mayor of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Aspen Institute Rodell Fellow. His office launched the One Albuquerque Kids across the state. And it also oversees Youth Connect, which is focused on coordinating childcare and other services. And Waukecha Wilkerson is with us. She's a parent advisor with Aspen's Ascend program. She's based in California, and she helps lead the Parent Powered Solutions Fund, advocating for support of community-based organizations that support student parents. Waukecha is the single mother of 3 children, works full-time, and is also pursuing a bachelor's degree in psychology. Waukecha, thanks for joining us as well. Viewers, just a note for you, you can join the conversation too. Just submit your questions to us and to our guests in the Q&A box. Governor Evers, I see you sitting there. We're going to begin with you. And of course, I would like to begin by acknowledging the protests that are unfolding in Kenosha right now. Demonstrations continue over the police shooting of Jacob Blake, who's a Black resident, whose children were nearby as a white officer shot him multiple times in the back. Thankfully, Jacob survived, but his family says he's been paralyzed from the waist down. He's got a long recovery a long road to recovery ahead of him. But you, Governor, you've been supportive of the protests, and you've called on state legislators to have a special session to go over a package of bills that would address racial equity and justice. So, but that legislation was stalled. So tell us, Governor, how that happened, and also just walk us through what those bills would include. You're muted.
Oh, how's that?
Yes,
Am I
much
good?
better. Yes.
Thank you. Well, thanks for describing the horrible, horrific situation we have in Kenosha, Wisconsin. It was clearly something that the Black community in Wisconsin and across the country have been facing for 400 years. And so systemic racism is a core issue in our state and across the country. And this situation really couldn't have been more horrific. Obviously, the complete details are still unknown, but what we do know is horrific. And that is an African-American man was shot in the back getting into his car 7 or 8 times and in front of his children. We know that for a fact. Other things we don't know. But clearly, there's a lot of pain and anguish across the country, across Wisconsin right now, and we're trying to work through that. But we also had a bevy of bills that really came out of the issue of systemic racism that dealt with policing, and we had hoped that the Republicans would take them up in addition to some of the bills they had, but primarily pretty basic issues around policing, like banning chokeholds, making sure that the proper training is in place, making sure that we have opportunities for violence interruption training for not necessarily police, but community members, so that they can step in and be helpful with their fellow community members. And so there's a series of bills that hadn't made it very far. Actually, most of them written by the Black Caucus in the legislature. And so we called a special session and kind of to up the ante and hopefully get some support. That will happen next Monday. However, I don't want to make this a political discussion, but in a past special session callings in the special session, Republican legislative leaders have balked at that. So we'll see what happens Monday, but I'm hopeful that they'll come into session and take up these bills and vote them up and down, change them, whatever. Let's have a discussion. This is really critical time for us to show leadership in the state, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do that.
What's your response to the fact that 3 people were shot and 2 killed during the protests overnight? And will that affect how protests are handled by the city moving forward? Well,
there's some things. Yes, we are going to be calling out more National Guard, but the bottom line is those deaths were, very unfortunate. But it was a group of vigilantes that were walking around with long guns, and somehow they got into an argument and 2 people got shot. I actually witnessed just before that a group of primarily all white vigilantes that were walking around with big guns, and there were some arguments going on. So the actual protesting around the unfortunate shooting went better last night. I don't want to dismiss 2 lives, whether they're vigilantes or not. That's 2 lives that shouldn't happen, but it just makes things more complex when we have different characters interacting in a way that is going to bring violence.
And before I move to our other guests, I just want some clarity, Governor. Is there a history of police violence towards Black people in Wisconsin? Would you say so?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the Milwaukee area, we've had several black men that have been dismissed from this world after interactions with the police. There's always mitigating factors, but the fact of the matter is that things seem to accelerate in a much more complex and, as it turns out, violent ways with African American men in particular. So yes, we're not immune to that situation. I know it's a national situation, so I don't want to say that it's endemic to Wisconsin, but it's something we have to deal with. I mean, when the situation in Minnesota happened, lots of people all across the state, from our smallest towns to our biggest towns, marching and demanding leadership and change as it relates to systemic racism. We've had 400 years of it. It's time. It's time.
Mayor Keller, I'm not sure if he's there right now, but Waukecha, I see you sitting there. Oh, Mayor, you are with us. You navigated protests and a shooting in Albuquerque in June as well. So I just wanted to hear from you what you think people are asking for when they're asking for justice, and what you've been prepared to do to help your residents achieve that.
Sure. Well, and I think just to begin with the heartbreaking shooting of Jacob Blake, and we've had protests in our town right after that as well. And I think it just speaks to despite all the community action and all that's happened, we've got to work towards actual police reform. And so I think to the governor's point about calling a special session, at some point you actually have to do something about it, not just talk about it. And that's on our elected officials collectively in America to do. And so I think what we've seen is that until we actually have policies that reflect the concept and the meaning behind Black Lives Matter, that make it real, like we're going to continue to see this, because I actually think this is an endemic problem in pretty much every city and everywhere in America. So this is something that's not going to go away until we address it directly. And I think similarly, when things do happen, this vigilante issue, I just want to speak to this too. We had the same thing here, where we have an explicitly racially defined white power organization that then shows up at peaceful protests and instigates things and tries to escalate things. We had a very similar situation. Fortunately, lives were not lost. But I just want to say that this is an American problem. And so in that regards, we are with Wisconsin, but we've got to move faster. And I think here in Albuquerque, we're already under a Department of Justice consent reform decree. So it's actually because things were so bad here that we do already have things like 7 out of 8 can't wait. We already have lapel cameras. We have different use of force policies. So, I think we're sort of on like first base at best, and we have a long way to go. But I know a lot of cities are just waking up to this fact, and it's something that all of America needs to wake up to right away.
This is, of course, the backdrop as our kids are getting ready to go back to school, as we're here to discuss. Waukecha, you're a mom raising 3 children, 2 of which are Black sons. What does justice look like to you?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Sasha. Being a mother of African-American sons in this society is very terrifying. The constant exposure to murders on social media, on the news, it creates a high level of anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. Having a teenage son who's Black, who's also very large in stature. We actually live in a very predominantly white neighborhood. And I recall in 6th grade, them calling the police on him at school for an 11-year-old because they perceived him as a threat. Mind you, my son has an individualized education plan. So there should be systems in place to support him through those transitions the same way his counterparts that are white were supported. However, that was not my experience. What's even more disheartening on a national level is becoming aware that the system is working as it is designed to work, and people trying to fix the system that is not broken. It actually needs an overhaul. a dismantling of sorts and rebuilding to incorporate the Black experience into the system, or the experience of several million other Black, Indigenous people of color. So I believe that until there is a significant change on a national, state, and local level, that we'll continue to see these atrocities happen. We'll continue to need even further supports psychologically, socially, and economically.
As we talk about issues of race and systemic racism, you know, it's fair to say that, of course, and you heard it from Waukecha's mouth, you know, this has played out in our school systems too. But Governor Evers, you have the unique perspective of having been a state superintendent before you were governor. Can you just frame this moment right now for us? What does back to school mean in this unprecedented time?
Well, you think about it, and we just talked about probably the top issue, and that's making sure that we attack the issue of systemic racism in this country and in our state. And right here, I'm in Madison, Wisconsin. So that's one framework. And then we have COVID-19 that also verifies what I just said. The results of COVID-19 are people of color, especially African Americans, who suffer disproportionate health outcomes in general, and now they are in COVID-19. And then you add the complexity of economic distress with people being out of work and things going haywire in the economy. You know, in Wisconsin, we have 421 school districts, and with everything we know about the way we live and work changing, school's going to be back to school. A, it's going to be difficult. B, it's going to look different in every district in the state of Wisconsin. I think there's a fair amount of confusion. There's a fair amount of fear, and so I'm very concerned. And then on top of it, not to layer something even more complex on top of it, I fear that the solutions to back to school, whether it's in-person, hybrid, or virtual, or any combination thereof, will also exacerbate the differences among kids by race and by poverty. So I think if I had to summarize all that, frankly, scary news, is that we, as a country, as a state, as individuals, we have to understand that kids are going to be traumatized by this, just like those three, you know, not nearly as bad as those three little girls in the back, or three little kids in the back seat of Jacob's car. But there's a lot of trauma out there. And so whatever we can do to bring mental health to the fore during this transition time, that has to be a priority.
Apologies for my neighbor who is mowing the lawn as we speak. These are the times we're in. Waukecha, I want to know what it's trying to get your kids ready to go back to school in the middle of a pandemic.
Wow. How long do we have? So now I feel a lot of pressure speaking on behalf of the millions of parents across the country. But I think there are certain things that may be unique to my experience. One being that I'm a single parent with not a lot of support locally. So the challenge of having 3 children to prepare at 3 different grade levels. I have one entering 9th grade, so one entering high school. I have a 2nd grader, and I have a kindergartner. So this will be a very challenging experience for me, also being a full-time employee. Fortunately, I have the privilege to work remotely. Unfortunately, our nation has what they consider a traditional work schedule, which conflicts with a traditional school schedule. So navigating across systems of school districts, my work, insurance, the emergency FMLA that is being offered, the nuances that weren't clearly defined in that. Having a son who's 5 years old who also lives with a pre-existing condition of severe asthma, so navigating through the healthcare system, having myself and 2 children also navigating through the mental health system. It has been interesting, to say the least. Some of the barriers that we faced, access to devices. Yes, there are devices, but that makes a 7-year-old responsible for a computer, a 5-year-old responsible for a computer, a 14-year-old responsible for a computer, and mom responsible for a work computer. It can be very difficult. There's this assumption that because I'm able to work remotely, that I'm also should be able to take care of 3 children simultaneously. There are several roles that I'll be wearing this upcoming fall. I'll be a teacher's assistant. I'll be a cafeteria worker. I'll be a custodian. I'll be a parent. I'll be an employee. I'll be a business owner. I'll be a employee. I'll be a manager of a team. So there are a lot of different hats that I'll be wearing simultaneously throughout the day that I won't be receiving any additional resources or pay for. We haven't received any support for additional food costs that are normally provided through the school. So there's an added expense without any sort of supplement. However, I feel that parents could use some supplement from the districts or the state regarding, the upkeep. They're upkeeping schools that are empty for the most part. There's the food budget that's being allocated to schools. I know parents right now who weren't qualified for free lunches at school. And during the pandemic, they weren't given access to food for their children through the end of spring. So it's really disheartening. It's as if people in our situation are encouraged to reach this level of self-sufficiency. And then throughout the pandemic, that marker has been moved further out of reach. So those of us who were close to reaching it are now pushed even further back through no fault of our own, but we're not receiving any sort of assurance from our national leaders. We're not receiving any sort of straightforward direction. While we understand it's new for everyone, no one's in our lifetime has really experienced a pandemic of this proportion. It's really sad to see our neighbors in other countries receive so much significant support monthly through either monetary compensation or supports to stay at home and stay in place. We're receiving multiple different instructions from different levels of government. It's really confusing, to say the most part, where you have someone like in my situation that wants my children to be safe, but also wants them to receive a fair and equitable education.
Yeah.
And living in an area, I live in Huntington Beach, California. You may have seen us on the news because the people in my community are more privileged than I am. So therefore, they are wanting everything to go back to normal right away. Whereas someone like me who doesn't have the ability to pay for a tutor or to pay for expensive daycare because daycare rates are raising because people can only take a certain amount of children. I don't have all of those resources that people in my neighborhood do. So we're told to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps to get to a certain level, and then it's taken away from us because then we can't keep up when something like a national pandemic or world pandemic happens.
Uh-huh. Thanks for sharing that with us, Waukecha. I also want to thank our viewers who have been sending in questions in the Q&A box. I want to read one from Angela Green that fits right along with what you were talking about, Waukecha. And Mayor Keller, I hope you can address it. First, sort of respond to what Waukecha was speaking about in terms of support. And here's Angela's question. She says, I work with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services admin for children and families. How can our human services system support our parents in this period of COVID-19 differently?
That's a great question. And Waukecha, your situation, I think, is all too common, unfortunately, all across America. And this is just a quick perspective on Albuquerque is about 500,000 people. And the APS, Albuquerque Public Schools, is separate from the city. So some cities it's combined, some it's not. So the mayor doesn't have any control, and I'll speak to that in a minute. But I think we estimate at least 50,000 parents in Waukecha's situation. Just to start out on a more basic point, I'm a public school dad. I was late this morning because I was trying to get my kids set up online to internet. And we do have a co-parent household. So my wife's also an essential worker, but she's able to work from home. And even with that, like trying to get these kids set up, and one's a kindergartner, one's a second grader. There are big picture things, which I'll speak to in a minute, but there are also realities in people's lives that I think really a lot of folks are ignoring, especially at the national level. I think in general, even in the education debate, you've got to understand, when are you supposed to get groceries? You've got to understand, how are you getting your kids to school, because the busing system is different. We have thousands of people without internet. So like there is no online learning. And so, our school district has closed till December. So again, for some context, meaning in person, they are doing special needs in person, which is a good thing. And they're doing all online, but the regulations about attendance and so forth still apply. So, you can't be late, and then it's truancy and all this other stuff. And so for, I think, anyone, there's also the notion of a child, right? A kindergartner doesn't necessarily understand how to use a computer, like even a touch screen. So let alone, you have to start with that. And our community has always been a minority majority city. It's been that way since way before America existed, and it still is today. And so there's also a second language challenge, a third language challenge with our Native American languages and Spanish. So anyway, you layer all of these in, and I think the challenge is there's been a dialogue about should schools start or should they not? And I think that is completely shortchanging working families, because it's totally ignoring that in either one of those options, the world is totally different. And so what we're trying to do here in Albuquerque is we're trying to actually set up a safety net for families in that situation. We want to say that in this city, you don't have to choose between going to work and or having to stay home and be with your kids for online learning. So we've opened up all our community centers, and there you can drop your kids off for minimal. It's $10 a week. You can drop your kids off of any age. And if they don't have a computer, we will log them in on our computers. If they do, they can bring that one. And we can't take responsibility for their education, but we can give them a safe place. We can give them 2 meals. We can give them access to the internet, supervision, and we can do our best to help those kids. I think right now we have about 3,000 in that system. We think, again, there's a much bigger demand. So we are looking at massive outdoor learning concepts, like in our baseball field and in our parks, where we actually have kids in groups of 5 or 10, regardless of age, because online, right, they're getting that age distinction learning, hopefully online. So we're just trying to provide supervision, but also keep it safe outside. And again, this is because staying at home for many is a luxury. Like this concept that people can just stay at home, I find ridiculous and insulting because it in many ways is biased towards people of color and of low income, but it's also not. Like there's 2 nurses that have to go to work too. And I just think we're ignoring all of that in the discussion of go to school or not to school. So anyway, in Albuquerque, at least that's what we're trying to do. And this was the first week of it. So I'm going to go check on it next, actually, and see how it's working out.
Mm-hmm. Governor, I want to open up the idea of support to you as well. It's a 2-part question. What kinds of support are you hearing that schools, students, and families need this year that might look different from the past? And what are some examples of ways that cities, counties, states have leaned in with new and innovative supports?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something we absolutely have worked on in our state, and I'll go back to my former hat as a state superintendent and former teacher and so on, is that schools almost have a pathological need to own every problem, and we're trying to change. We're trying to change that. Is that interventions must be school, community, family, police, whatever groups are able to provide support, and own that, because an education is directly related to all those things. When I became governor, I hired cabinet members based on their ability to connect the dots. And that is crucially important, especially now. And there are ways to, and I know you may talk about this later, but to braid revenue streams for that purpose. And I'll just give you one small example. Well, I'll talk a little bit about our Leadership Council for Early Learning. It includes all our secretaries, whether it's corrections. Think about that connection is really important. Health and social services, and obviously children and families, is the education department, but transportation and healthcare and housing. All those things impact the lives of kids. And so a small example of how that plays out is in La Crosse, Wisconsin, a small city, but or a medium-sized city in Wisconsin. And we worked with them and the police and philanthropy and the schools and the health services to create hubs for low-income schools, schools that have high poverty levels. And not only do these hubs have food and clothing services for children, but they also have a social worker there. They also have an outreach person from the police department. They also have other community services there. So those hubs exist for those kids to bring all those services together, paid for by different parts of the community and different parts of the state. It's been very successful. Of course, the proof is going to be in the pudding this fall as it relates to the opening of school. But I think having that in place gives those children, frankly, a heads up.
I have a few more questions before I open it up to the ones that we've been getting in the Q&A box, because I see that getting filled and I want to make sure I get to those. But Waukecha, as our parent on this panel, I know one of the challenges and one of the greatest needs is to have a voice, to have some kind of say, for there to be room made at this table for parents and families. Talk to me a little bit about what that would mean, what meaningful engagement in the decision making would actually look like, and why that matters.
I think meaningful engagement and having a seat at the table is very crucial in times like these, when those policies that are being implemented affect us in such a detrimental, it can be a detrimental way. I think that means that we're not just always taking the opinions of quote unquote experts when making these decisions, and we have people who have these lived experiences as part of those discussions. It's really interesting. For example, in my workplace, they check the box that they're flexible with scheduling. However, having the children at home, I've been told before, can't you go into another room? Everyone doesn't have the privilege or the opportunity to go into another room of the house. I think a lot of things weren't considered when there are schools that are opening at full capacity as if things are normal. Some of those children, while the statistics are saying that children are less likely to carry the virus or have significant effects of the virus, those children can live in multi-generational homes where their grandparents, their great grandparents, their aunts, their uncles who have these, you know, really complex conditions that can be impacted with a child bringing home the virus. So I think having a voice, and especially in panels like this, where I get to, you know, hear the positions of leaders within our country, is really important to highlight and showcase that, you know, we may not be a technical expert with an education, you know, of a PhD. However, we're experts in our lives, and I think that's there's value in that.
Can you talk about, Waukecha, how Black and Brown families specifically have been particularly disadvantaged when it comes to engagement with those in power and being part of policy solutions?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of misconception that the decisions that are made are equitable. They may be equal, but they're not equitable. And equity is something that I think is getting a lot of traction these days, but still not enough to where Black and Brown voices are taken seriously or represented in legislation. And it shouldn't be a symbolic gesture to have a Black person to speak on behalf of you. You'll need different perspective. My Black experience is unique to me. We're not monolithic in that way. There are the same way that there are different white experiences in America. There are several different Black, Indigenous, and people of color experiences in America, and there's not one size that fits all. You can't say, well, making the assumption that because you create a policy that affects low income, that will and benefit me in some way. Maybe I don't fit in that box of low income inner city. Maybe my experience is different. Maybe I live in a middle America, moderate income area where I don't feel included in the community, because we have our national leaders making promises to people in my community that affordable housing will go away, essentially saying that people like me are not welcome, and having the people in my community to support that. It's really difficult. You tell us to reach a certain level, and then when we reach that certain level of status, then you tell us we're not welcome there anyway. We're going to keep moving the mark for you. Go build it somewhere else. Okay, well then invest in creating a community for me to live in that is, where you told us to be, but that is also safe, that also has adequate education, that has access to healthcare. If that's the way that it's going to be, because then that's equity. I'm not asking for you to give me a handout, but give us a hand up.
Senegal Mabry asked the questions, what supports do cities and leaders need to sustainably tackle issues of racism in schools? What do you say to that, Governor? She says, there will still be children of color traumatized by the loss of life from COVID-19 in Latinx, Native, and Black communities, and police violence after protests stop across the country. So what other support do you need to tackle the issue of racism in schools?
Yeah, and if it's only in schools, it's not going to work. I will guess I won't argue the point, but this has to be a national priority. This has to be something that, as Waukecha was talking about, that impacts every part of people's lives. And so I don't want, it's not that I don't think schools can play a huge role. I think they do, but as I said before, I think their school people are pathological and wanting to, okay, here's our problem, we're going to solve it and pull something off a shelf and here you go. That's just, frankly, that's BS. We absolutely must coordinate those programs together, whether they're programs in people's homes, whether they're programs in the community, or whether they're programs in the schools. And they must be consistent, and they must be wide ranging, and they must involve, we need to involve the people that we're trying to help and move our states and nation forward. But I guess I just feel that we have to make that decision right from the top. I mean, I know governors and mayors play a huge role, but the issue of combating racism it's playing out just as we talked about earlier in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where we have people, begging for the change, and we have people that are vigilantes saying, kind of not happening here. So we have some big issues that we have to resolve, but at the end of the day, there are good programs. I talked about the one in La Crosse, Wisconsin, where the community, different community services and different school services and even different police services and the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse have all come together to form these hubs where parents and kids and school people and others in the community can get services and get answers to questions and can get fed if that's a need. And so I just think we have to look, if it's only going to be around how we solve a problem with schools, I think we fail. I mean, that it's just not going to work. We need a collective voice here, not just a teacher.
Before I pivot to the mayor, Governor, you said, the change needs to come from the top. Are you saying the current administration is hindering some of the things that you want to achieve, or
yes.
What do you mean?
Yes, and I know there's press people here, so you always have to be kind of concerned about that. But yeah, there's the president has been inconsistent on this issue. He's been inconsistent on the pandemic, at best inconsistent, and we need consistency. And I'm not making a pitch here for who's going to be our next president, but if we had consistency in our response to the pandemic, we would be in a different place now than we were before, or than we are right now. And so I think consistency is important, and saying that Black Lives Matter, even though it's easy to say, apparently it's not that easy, and that people feel reluctant to do it because they're reluctant to tackle the issue of racism, 400 years of racism. It's daunting. I get it. 400 years is a long time, but we have to do it. We need leadership from the top.
Mayor Keller, Mary Ellen Wiggins writes, she says, I appreciated Waukecha's remark about different guidance from different levels of government. She wants to know, how do you see your respective role at local and state levels versus what the feds can or should do? So how do you see it different based on what you can do versus what the feds can do? And what do you see as the limits on what you can do here?
Well, I think, as any person in a position who wants to try and do more, we can always use more ability. And I mean, I'm just saying, at the city level, as I mentioned here, we have no formal say over the schools. So I have, for example, told them in written form and otherwise, like, you've got a group online learning in mornings or afternoons, so at least parents can do something for childcare or work opposite that. I mean, these really basic things that I think are being ignored, but they were ignored when I said them too. And so I just want to note that, on a practical level, I actually think that there is a reason for public health departments and so forth to actually have, in these pandemic cases, even more authority to regulate these areas, because, as the governor mentioned, there's many also different school districts. So, we have private schools, which of course people can afford, who, they can go to school and buy their way out of all these challenges. So that's also creating even more division and piling on to the inequity that already exists. Like, we're enhancing equity greatly throughout Corona in all sorts of ways. And those are the things that I wish a state or a federal government, or if I had the power, a city government, could really try and work on. But I do want to add, I think, one other aspect to this, which is that the simple solution, I believe, with respect to how you get around this, is through funding. And I know that sounds very basic and fundamental, But look, our programs are costing us right now. This is a $7 million program that we're running. And the longer it runs, the more it costs. And obviously city tax revenues are down because of the economy and so forth. So one of the best things we can get at the local level is unrestricted funds so that we can make decisions that make sense for our community. And that's something that I know has been a huge hot button issue on the second stimulus because really of partisan politics, because basically mayors tend to be Democrats and governors, the majority are Republican. And so this literally is the reason why working families aren't getting stimulus right now. It's ridiculous. So we need to break through that.
Governor, you heard the mayor, funding is always at the center of these decisions. For states wanting to lean in and help schools, though, where does the money come from and how can braided funding work?
Yeah, well, it can work. I mean, obviously, the pandemic has made our budget kind of mincemeat. We're in a difficult financial place. Some of the CARES funding has helped us in that respect, and we've been able to get a lot of it out the door to municipalities and counties and school districts. But at the end of the day, and I'll use that example we had before, the Department of Health Services is part of our state government, and they threw some money into the pot, and so did the La Crosse School District threw some money into the pot, and so on and so forth, and created this braided service that's doing great things. I know it's a small thing, but we've got these situations all across the state. We have to do more of it. But when I created our cabinet, I made sure that they knew how to connect the dots, and we frankly took a lead on. We also have a anti-homelessness effort here in Wisconsin, and we bring in everybody that runs the state agency. They are at the table when we say this is something we know can help homelessness. I expect every one of those cabinet members to either have input or have money that they can throw into the pot to make things happen. So it can work. It's messy, busy work, but it's well worth the effort because, as I learned, and I'll say it again, too often schools are pathological and we can solve this, bring it on. And it's just not the case. We need everybody. We need everybody to do that. And I just think that's important. And that's one way to kind of get around at a small level the problems of shortages of money. Now, I will say, and this is a political statement, I think every state in the nation has to balance their budget. The federal government doesn't. And so if we wanted to have greater resources, that's where it has to come from. I mean, we have to balance the budget. I'm sure the mayor does. I'm sure the state does, just like we do. It's constitutional. We have to do it. That's not the case in the federal government. They can print money. Simple as that.
Governor, a question here from Sanford Johnson. Interested in the hub approach to providing health and social services. Have other communities across Wisconsin adopted this approach? And are you starting to see more collaboration across school districts?
Yes. I'm seeing more collaboration among local systems. And that's great. Another small one, but it's really important. A couple of rural counties had trouble with kids being abused and be taken out of their home, and they really set some good metrics and some goals. The county social services and the school district and others, and private philanthropy threw some money into a pot to do whatever they could to keep kids safe, but also there are a number of situations where, if with the proper support, they can stay home and thrive, and they're having great success. It's an important step. People don't like to talk about child abuse, but it exists in small towns and it exists in large towns. And so they set some really strong metrics around seeing that work. And it's easy to say, okay, the kid's going to go from this couple and we're going to put them in a foster home. There are ways to do it internally in families without disrupting the family, as long as there's enough support, and been very successful. So we've done that across the state. We have to do more of that. I mean, it's just, I can talk about probably 6 or 7 that I know of, and so there's probably double that, but Wisconsin's a big state. We have a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. Waukecha, Angela Green asks a question. She says, if you could design the perfect support system for parents with school-age children right now, what would that look like?
Oh, wow. So in my dream world, this is not hard to imagine because I've imagined it many times over the last 5 or 6 months. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the fact that I'm a parenting student also. So on top of my other duties, I'm also earning my degree as well, which poses another challenge in and of itself. But if I could design the perfect supports, I would think that looks like reallocating some funds to families with children so that we're able to do what some of the more privileged families are and create learning cubes for our children with other parents where there's a support, whether that be a vetted and screened tutor or someone who comes in who can help guide them through the learning process through those hours. Because what hasn't been discussed is while I have the privilege to work remotely, a lot of my colleagues and parenting students, they do not have that privilege. They are essential workers. They are forced to leave their home every day and make a very, very difficult choice whether or not they're going to keep income coming into the home or they're going to stay home with their children. And we're receiving so many different directives. Stay in place unless you have to leave. Only leave for essential causes. Okay, well, I have to feed my children. I have to go to work. So I have to leave my children. But what if I don't have adequate support? What if my mother isn't able to log onto a computer system? What if my mother isn't able to help, or whoever? What if I don't have a family here that can help with my children? So I'm forced to either quit my job and stay home and make sure my children go to school, or go to school and leave my children with inadequate childcare. So for me, the perfect solution is to reallocate those funds or create supports outside of the school system. This is only highlighting the fact that our school system is inadequate because a lot of families are relying on the school system for childcare, which shouldn't be the case, but unfortunately it is what it is. So if we're giving more options, more flexibility on what that looks like, even more flexibility with what a work week is on a national level, is it really necessary to work 9 to 5 days a week at the same time having children in school from 8 to whatever time 5 days a week? Is that what it should be right now? Or can we be flexible? And on a national level, this is our opportunity to build what is equitable for our country. This is our time to say, you know what, that wasn't working. Let's quit trying to fit the round peg into the square hole, and let's go find a round hole that fits for everyone. So for me, to sum that up, the perfect solution is to allow more flexibility than what the norm for the systems has been. So whether that's in-home instruction, whether that's in-school instruction, I don't think there should be a one-size-fit-all for every situation. And I don't think that my supports would be the norm across the country. I think maybe we need to start thinking about something that is different than what we've done before.
In the interest of time, I will pose this question, which was both for the governor and the mayor. I'll pose this just to you, Mayor Keller. It's from Elizabeth Schneider. She says, can you speak to what progress has been made in closing the digital divide in your state? Understanding competing priorities and budget balancing, this is an area where there must be a real sense of urgency. So that digital divide again. You're muted. There you go.
So this one, for us, I think this is just a good example. And even with what Keisha said, where we have these cracks in the system, and what I think Corona has done is made them like gaping fissures, and so the digital divide is one of them. And so we've tried to do a couple of things. Number one is we actually outfitted vans, city vans, with a Wi-Fi device. So this is our mobile Wi-Fi program, and we go park that at parks and in different neighborhoods where we know there's not good Wi-Fi. So we provide like remote Wi-Fi for free. You just have to get near the van and you can sort of do it. The challenge is, of course, like people are still in their car. So, I mean, it is helpful for downloading and uploading, but no one wants to sit there all day in their car. So it's, but it's one thing that we've tried, and we actually have 90 vehicles now doing this all over the city, and they can move, which is great. So we move them based on usage and demand and so forth. The other aspect of this is just making sure that any city funded public housing, we're going to use some of our CARES money to make sure that Wi-Fi is basically free and adequate in all city housing. And it's not right now. I was actually surprised to learn that. And so that's, again, these are just small things, but we're a very rural state in general. And even in the city, we have very rural agrarian parts to Albuquerque. And the digital divide is very real. And so I think, we have tried in the past to create our own utility. So like you would create an electric utility or a water utility, to create a broadband authority. And I think we're going to go back towards that direction where the city actually owns it, and then we can control the pricing and who gets it and how it's subsidized and so forth. But last time when we tried that, believe it or not, there was no one interested, no partner who would actually operate it. No one bid on the contract. Now that was a year ago before Corona. So we're going to put it out again, and we hope that we'll get some local entrepreneurs who want to start a city broadband authority so that we actually can truly democratize the internet for everyone.
Before we go, Governor, you heard what Waukecha had to say about her dream support system. Your final thoughts on just how schools can be better supported by state governments right now, thinking of school year 2021, which is so unique.
Yeah, and Waukecha had a great plan, and it is something that it reminds us that it has to be individualized. I just have to quickly tell the story. I was watching one of the networks like a month ago, and an African-American mom was on, and somebody over here and somebody over here. And she kept saying, just wait a minute, I got to go to work. I got to go to work. Tell me what I can do. And frankly, I just think there has to be some way to make sure that parents have the wherewithal, and if that means direct payments to parents to help them navigate this weird world, we should be able to do that. I mean, unemployment compensation kind of works, insurance works that way to an extent, but having parents having the resources available to them to make those type of decisions, I think is important. Obviously, we're not going to get there tomorrow, but it's something that if we truly look at the different funding streams we have and make them more directly available to individuals, we'll be in a better position.
Mayor, I know you've shared some with us already, but you just heard the governor. Just quickly, some action steps that you're taking, going forward to help better support schools for this particular school year.
For us, it's about trying to have the flexibility to react to the changing school schedules. So which just assume that they're choosing the best paths forward, whether it's open, partial reopen, hybrid, and that kind of thing. What we're trying to say with our own employees and these families that essentially we are doing childcare and supporting APS in that community center setting, we're saying, look, we're going to try and be flexible as possible, which has been really hard for us, which means that no matter what APS says, no matter what our school district says, we will be there for several thousand families who don't have the luxury of being able to stay at home, who do have to go to work. But it takes, even to do that, to change all the schedules and this kind of stuff, like it takes a couple of weeks for us even to adjust, but we're committed to doing this actually in perpetuity as long as I'm here. So we've made it a top funding priority that we will not leave essential workers without somewhere they can take their kids so they don't have to make that false choice. But it is going to be a moving target every single time Corona goes up and down and the school year changes.
Well, our special thanks to you, Mayor Tim Keller, Governor Tony Evers, and Waukecha Wilkerson. Thank you so much for joining us today. This program, once again, it was brought to you by the Aspen Institute's Education and Society and Ascend programs. And thank you for watching and taking part in this very important discussion. Your questions were excellent, and I'm glad we could get some answers for you today. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.